I'm delighted to be here with Michael, Gio, and Alexandra. And I'm flattered to be invited to this conference again. I attended the Bangor conference last year, and it was quite informative. I'm pleased to share with you the Canadian experience. I hope that you take from the Canadian experience and helps to inform and shape your particular challenges. I don't want to leave anyone with the impression that Canada has it right. We've developed a system that works in our situation, in our circumstances. Let me start by, I usually like to give some anecdotes after lunch. Doing presentations after lunch is a kiss of death. You're all, I'm sure, digesting your food. So let me start with some interesting facts. I don't know how many people realize this, but Canada and the UK have a shared past, shared history. So let me go through some of those for you. It dates back to 1497, and the gentleman on the screen is a gentleman by the name of Giovanni Caboto, or as you would know him, John Cabot. He was asked by King Henry VII to find a shorter path to the Orient, and on his way to the Orient he stumbled onto a rock that he named Fondille, or New Island, which is Newfoundland in Canada, one of our provinces. Eventually explorers moved off the rock and further west, and that territory became a British colony, which is now Canada. We operate on a Westminster parliamentary system, so we have a House of Commons and a Senate. And perhaps the most interesting statistics about Canada is that during the last Statistics Canada census, over 50% of the Canadian population cited UK origins as their heritage. And the chart in front of you gives you a sense for how 50% of the Canadian population identify themselves. Those are just a few examples of our shared past, but I'm going to give you one that's probably the least known and one that I want to discuss today. It's a concept that we imported from the UK called Love Day. Any lawyers in the room? Maybe in your law history class you may have stumbled on Love Day. Have you heard of Love Day? Not at all? Okay. Well, even the lawyers don't know what Love Day is. Let me explain to you what Love Day is. The origins of Love Day have been debated by academics and scholars for quite some time. Some believe it was derived from Roman law, others from canon law, and if you read some literature, even suggests that the Franciscan monks went around the countryside when they saw the barbaric acts of the English murdering and pillaging each other. They went around introducing this Love Day. So the origins aren't quite clear. The earliest reference to Love Day is during the Anglo-Norman period, and the clearest reference is in the laws of the kings of Kent around 670 AD. You're probably still wondering what Love Day is. It's a medieval custom of settling disputes through arbitration mediation, and what it was a conciliatory process among English merchants in the late Middle Ages to early Georgian period. And it was typically used to resolve disputes over the purchase or sale of goods, settling of debts, or contract disputes. So the way it worked, that each party in dispute would select one or more people to settle the dispute, and these were usually senior, respected members of the guild that they belonged to. So if you were a carpenter, you had a carpenter's guild, etc. The objective of this process was to expose facts, settle disagreements, and restore business relationships. This is essentially the role my office plays in the Canadian government procurement context. We expose facts, we settle disagreements, and we restore business relationships. My office deals with commercial disputes in the federal procurement system. What I'm talking about here in the UK context is central government. So when I refer to federal government, I'm talking about central government as distinguished from provincial or municipal. So the federal procurement system is different from the municipal, provincial, and health systems. Firms come to us when they're experiencing problems dealing with a government ministry or government department. Canadian federal procurement is described as complex. We heard about it this morning. Most jurisdictions describe their procurement system as complex. In the Canadian context, it's governed by 15 acts and regulations, numerous trade agreements, various policies, and the process itself has become very legalistic over the years. And when we layer on top of that a very risk-adverse Canadian public bureaucracy, then you get a sense for the difficulty that firms would have in dealing with federal procurement. And it's not difficult to imagine firms becoming exasperated and disillusioned when dealing with federal tenders. So we're the modern day version of Loveday. We're the senior respected moderators in the process. We help firms and ministries resolve procurement issues. We've been in existence since 2008. We were created through an act of parliament, so we're a legislated ombudsman. And we have associated regulations, which I'll talk about in a minute. Prior to our creation, firms had very limited recourse for dealing with ministries. They essentially had three choices. They could continue to argue and bicker with ministries about whether their RFP was properly evaluated or not, or they could bicker about not having won a procurement attempt. They could take lengthy and costly legal action, and if you're dealing with SMEs in Canada, they're dealing with a very small profit margin. They typically can't afford to hire a lawyer to deal with ministries, or they could simply accept the issue and walk away, which is what a lot of firms did prior to the creation of our office. They just accepted that dealing with the government was complex. They saw it as a lost opportunity and the cost of doing business with the government and walked away. As you can well imagine, this led to poor perception of the government. The government was viewed as isolated and unresponsive. Our role is to connect suppliers and ministries. We play an impartial intermediary role. We're independent and neutral. We work at arm's length from ministries. So I report to a minister, but that minister is not involved in the day-to-day activities of my office, nor the content of my report. My jurisdiction covers virtually every federal government department and agency. The only exceptions are the intelligence type agencies, or our version of the American CIA, or your M6, thank you. But virtually every other government department and agency falls under my purview. My only requirement is to produce an annual report, and there's an image of it, last year's report, to the minister, and I have to do that within a specified time frame, and the minister, according to regulation, is required within her own or his own specified time frame to table that in Parliament. I'm neither a lobbyist for suppliers nor an apologist for ministries. Now, in preparing for my presentation, I stumbled on a Lord Young report, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with, and I was intrigued with a section that Lord Young speaks about, which is titled the Customer to Grow, Public Sector Procurement. And that section, if you've read it, speaks of the potential for government procurement to create significant growth opportunities for SMEs. The second initiative that I stumbled on was a UK central government consultation where they plan to introduce legislation favorable to SMEs. So what this information told me that there are signs that government ministries will be dealing with SMEs in an increasing number here in the UK. And contained in the Lord Young report are a list of grievances that SMEs currently have in doing business with the public sector. Now, I could erase the image of the growing business report and the Lord Young header, and I could tell you that these are the same identical grievances that we've identified in Canada. If you pick up any of my annual reports to Parliament, you'll see these very same issues being identified in Canada. So there's another similarity between our countries. Let me give you an overview of the Canadian procurement system. Now, I converted our Canadian dollars to pounds to make it easy to discuss. And I titled this, Is a Loveday Organization Really Necessary? The figures in white are the Canadian figures. The black bracketed figures are the UK version. The UK figures I derived from the public sector procurement spent data, the OGC. So in Canada, we spend about 10 billion pounds, British pounds, on procurement annually. According to your source documents, it's 86 billion here in the UK. In Canada, that represents about 385,000 contracts a year. If I were to take that in the Canadian context, it would be about 3 million contracts here in the UK. Of that, 92% are what we consider to be low dollar value contracts, or 355,000 contracts are low dollar value. And in Canada, we define low dollar value contracts as under 14,000 pounds for goods and services. So you're asking yourself, well, that's all very interesting data, but what does it mean? Well, the majority of firms that supply the Canadian government these low dollar value contracts are SMEs, small medium enterprise. And if I look at the targets that have been set up here in the UK, you plan on increasing your business to SMEs from 10.5% of the 86 presumably in 2012-13 to 25% by 2015. It's safe to say that if that was in the Canadian context, my office would have exponential growth in business. SMEs in Canada pose a particular challenge. Most are what I call ma and pa shops that are new to government procurement. They work on a very thin profit margin. They don't have the professional bidding units that you see in larger firms. If you go to the large firms, there's typically in Canada a group within the large firms that surf our government tender site and do the professional bidding. Our small, medium enterprises don't have that luxury. Unfortunately, SMEs in Canada have a perception that government procurement is impenetrable and in some cases indifferent. Again, unfortunately, a lot of them don't have the time to familiarize themselves with the government procurement rules. And this could be fortunate or unfortunately, a lot of them do business with each other the old-fashioned way, a handshake and a promise, and they expect to do business with government the same way, and it just doesn't work that way. As a result, SMEs represent the majority of the calls that we get as an office. And this was recognized by the Canadian government and the primary reason that we exist. My office receives, on average, about 400 contacts per year. If I use the UK figures, that would be about 3,200 calls a year. I'm simply using your numbers and extrapolating to our business volumes. About 3,200 contacts per year is what I would expect to, if I were operating in the UK here. When these small and medium enterprises phone us, they've already tried dealing with the ministry. And most of them have lost a contract opportunity. They don't know why or how. They just don't understand how the process works. And they think that there's something at play here. I don't want to sound sensationalize the matter, but a lot of them feel that there's a conspiracy at play. They feel absolutely helpless dealing with government because in the Canadian context, typically when a procurement officer receives a call from a firm wondering why they've lost the opportunity. There's a reluctance in disclosing too much information. There are debriefing sessions, but the debriefing sessions are, there are certain parameters around a debriefing session, and typically those debriefing sessions don't answer the questions that firms want answered. And in defense of the ministries, a lot of times they can't answer the questions that are being asked. So when an SME calls us, they're typically feeling helpless, they're frustrated, and they want a trusted voice to turn to, and they want answers, and that's what we're there to help them do. Our role, first and foremost, when we receive a call from a supplier, is to listen. This is more of an issue of dealing a human resource management issue than as a procurement issue when that initial call comes in. We're there to listen. When our investigators answer the phone, they allow the supplier or the firm to simply vent. They haven't had that opportunity, and we provide that opportunity for them to vent. Once that's out of the way, we do our utmost to provide assistance and information. And I should tell you that roughly 80 to 90% of the times, simply providing that information deals with the issue. They're getting the information from a trusted voice. They're getting the information from what they perceive and what is a neutral, independent body. That typically satisfies their problem or their concern. Occasionally that doesn't work, and we have to do what I refer to as shuttle diplomacy, which is essentially phoning the ministry and finding out what's going on, relaying that information to the supplier. On rare occasion, we try to get the supplier and the ministry to talk directly. That's essentially what we're trying to do. Our motto and our objective in the office is to preserve the business relationship. SMEs are a critical component of the Canadian economy, and what we want to do is minimize the number of SMEs that are disenfranchised with dealing with federal procurement. Our view is that the bigger the pool of suppliers, the better the competition. The better the competition, the better the quality. The better the quality, the lower the price, which ultimately benefits the taxpayer. So when we pick up the phone dealing with a supplier, our goal is to restore that business relationship that's been either partially or severely damaged. Now, I won't mislead you. Sometimes trying to resolve the issue in this way just doesn't work. And the regulations require me to do certain things when certain criteria is met. So when resolving through shuttle diplomacy isn't enough, we have a regulated requirement to get to the bottom of the issue. And we do that in three ways. When a supplier calls us with a specific complaint, a complaint about award of a contract or the administration of a contract, I have to assess that complaint against our regulations. If it meets the parameters of our regulations, I have no choice but to investigate. So for example, on a contract award issue, if the award is under, if the contract is under £14,000 for goods or £54,000 for services, if it's submitted to me in writing and within a certain time frame, and there's a whole checklist of things I have to ensure, if it meets those criteria, I do not have a choice. I have to investigate that complaint. I have 10 days in which to make my determination, and those 10 days are typically used to try to resolve the issue informally. If it can't be resolved informally, or if the supplier says, look, this is a complaint, I want it investigated, I have no choice but to investigate. That's on the award of a contract. On the administration, if the complaint is about the administration of a contract, there are no financial limits. If it meets the criteria established in the regulations, I must investigate. The objective of these investigations is to determine if the issues raised by the complainant have merit. Now, I'm required to provide that information or that complaint to the ministry and allow them to respond. And I have the right to recommend compensation if the ministry is found at fault. The second area is to examine systemic or conspicuous issues. This is where I can establish reasonable grounds, or I find a trend with a particular procurement vehicle or a ministry. I have the authority to go into that ministry and essentially do an audit of the procurement process or the procurement vehicle. Again, the idea here is to make recommendations for improvement, and what I'm looking for here is to ensure that the process or the issue that's been identified is the procurement process being done in a fair, open, and transparent manner. And finally, I can intervene when two parties to a contract, a ministry and a government department, or I'm sorry, a supplier and a government department, are in dispute about the terms and conditions of a contract. This is essentially bringing the two parties to the table to mediate a resolution. It's a voluntary process, but the results are confidential and the resulting agreement is legally binding. Okay, having traveled down this street, you're wondering what are the benefits? From our experience to date, our office provides a voice for firms that normally would not have a voice. Ministries, we find, are more likely to take our call and listen to the issue through our voice than through the ministry, or through the supplier, I'm sorry. Overall, it lends credibility to the system. If a firm, a small and medium enterprise, can turn to a government institution to complain about a ministry, it lends credibility to the system. And then finally, on the government side, let's be frank, just the fact that the office was created provided some political demonstration that they took SMEs seriously. This is an outlet for small and medium enterprise and the complaints they had. On a practical level, it provides a legitimate avenue to deal with a multitude of issues that arise in procurement. When you look at the volumes I spoke of earlier, it's inevitable that issues will arise in procurement. And at the political level, it provides some comfort that there's some oversight and a check and balance in the procurement system. In closing, the image that you see in front of you is Loveday Street in Birmingham here in the UK. It's probably a relic of the medieval period I spoke of in my introduction. Apparently, it was effective. Loveday was effective back in the medieval period in settling quarrels, regulating social behavior, and bringing peace to the community. And to date, that's been our experience in Canada. My office helps to settle commercial quarrels. It regulates federal procurement behavior and brings a sense of fairness, openness, and transparency to Canadian federal procurement.